And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. We've got a big show today. We're going to do a large Q&A, and then next week we're going to start going back to sort of our mob biographies and other stuff. So where have I been? Essentially, I've been nowhere. I've just took a long break from the show to work on a book, and I also had some meetings with some entertainment people, which I really can't get into it at the moment, but there's a lot of cool stuff that's going to start happening. And really, I wanted to sit down with some entertainment firms anyway, just because I wanted to talk about how we can make the show bigger, better, and etc. And we think we have some really exciting ways. So I'm looking forward to that and seeing what that presents. Of course, the haters are out in droves saying what they usually say. But I don't really want to get into that because it's not worth feeding morons and giving them an inch. It's just not worth it. You can't please everybody, and that's just the fact of life. So, with all that being said, there is going to be probably, I don't know the timing of this, but there'll probably be some announcements in the next couple weeks about what I am going to be doing and some other stuff, but it's all good stuff. It's all big stuff, so I'm looking forward to that. With all that being said, I did get off of Twitter. I just got to the point where the abusive crap from everybody was just getting to the point where it was just ridiculous. And also at the same time, with every social media account being so big and so many messages coming in, I just can't get back to anybody. And obviously I'm not going to hire somebody to do that at this point. So that is the reason why I got off of Twitter. So a lot of people are asking, well, then how can I submit questions? Very easy. Go over to Facebook, drop a post, a link, whatever it is that you need to do to submit a question, and I'll be glad to make sure that they get into sort of the pot of questions that I get every week. So yes, we're going to be back on our regularly scheduled show once or twice a week. And for those that were harassing me nonstop, when's the next show? Here we are. I had actually recorded this show. And then when I went back to edit and do a couple of things to add some stuff, the sound was all screwed up somehow. I don't know whether it was the processor or what happened, but I had to re-record it and try it again, and then something else malfunctioned, and so this is like my third attempt at this. So hopefully I can get through this and we can keep it going. With all that being said, there is a couple of news and notes I wanted to get to. The first thing is I wanted to talk about Canada, and the reason why, you might have heard me on Scott William Collier's page, the True Crime Page podcast, and we talked a little bit in detail about what's going on in Canada. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of news that I can tell you about that, but one thing I can say is it looks like the Rizzuto crime family has sort of dug their heels in and sort of regained some territory, and it seems like the shooting is probably going to stop. Now, that's coming from the RCMP and other people that report on the mob in Canada. There are not allegations, but rumors that they reached a sort of deal with the Hells Angels, a partnership, so to speak, which they've always had partnerships with different subgroups, and so bringing the Hells Angels into the fold sort of quiets things down. And the thing that they're always fighting over, especially on the border and on the reservations in Canada, is the tobacco and the drugs and that sort of thing. Obviously, the Rizzutos have been fighting with Andromeda and other little subgroups, and that's been going on for the last 6 years. In fact, there were 30 murders in 6 years in Canada. So do I think it's suddenly just going to stop? I think it will for a while. I don't think the longevity of that will last, but it seems like the Rizzutos have sort of been able to get a foothold back, which is surprising to me because I honestly, and I was on record with saying this, I didn't think they would survive it. I thought that they had too many forces sort of coming at them and trying to really demolish them in a way. And then when you talk about investigations itself, so, we've seen the gunfire back and forth between all these groups, and I think that with the Hells Angels in the mix, if that's true, it's going to slow down a little bit. How long that is going to slow down remains to be seen, because I think Andromeda was making a push to take over everything. Everybody wants the tobacco rackets, the drug rackets, but it seems right now, at least according to the Canadian press and the RCMP, and just the Canadian government, they think that it's going to slow down, which is a good thing for Canada. I think it's a good thing for everybody that's involved. 30 murders in 6 years is ridiculous, sort of like the 1980s Wild Wild West in New York City. But that seems to be where it's going to go. Now, how long it will last is going to depend on a lot of different factors, because we don't know if they split up turf. We don't know if they sat down, had a meeting, shook hands, and let it go. That is one of the things that I had said a couple of weeks ago, or I think a couple months ago, is that at that point when things were still, every week somebody was getting whacked, I had said, what's stopping them from sitting down, shaking hands, and just dealing with the core issue itself? Obviously, we know the Rizzutos have a patterned history of killing people, and they've been killed themselves. Eye for an eye, a lot of retribution involved in a lot of the things that they do. A lot of younger upstarts with smaller fringe groups trying to take a run. So how long this lasts, I'm not really sure. I think it's good in the sense of nobody's getting killed, obviously. But it only takes one or two tiny things to get it going again. So I think a lot of this that's being said by Canada specifically, I don't know how true it is, but if it is true, it would make sense as to why things have kind of quieted down a little bit. Now, there was one other thing that was in the news probably like 2.5 weeks ago. I covered it also on Scott's show a little bit, and it's not something I really want to talk about, and I'll be honest with you, because to me it's a non-news sort of item. It's bullshit and innuendo, as usually it is, and I do have a question that was sort of asked of me for the Q&A, but I'm going to kind of address it just simply here. Joey Merlino and Pete Tuccio, the idiots down in Philadelphia, you know who I'm talking about. Obviously, you know why I don't like them. Have sort of once again tongue-in-cheeked a scenario to try to make it into something more than it is. If you don't know, Pete Tuccio is an alleged associate of the Gambino crime family in New York, got caught up in a bunch of shit. You can look up the information for yourself. I don't want to rehash the entire thing. But one of the things that happened was he was obviously at Joey's trial. Okay? He obviously had taken photos with Joey and etc., and that was on Instagram, and everybody's been posting that fucking everywhere at vomitous levels. But here's the thing. Just because somebody here hangs out with somebody there as friends or whatever the case may have been does not mean they're in cahoots, does not mean they have business ties. Sometimes a photo is just a fucking photo. All right? So how anybody in South Philly can make a leap by saying, oh, well, the feds are really putting the pressure on Tuccio to talk about Joey. Well, Pete's got nothing to say about Joey because there is nothing to say about Joey. If I took a photo with Mike Tyson, what does that mean? I knew he raped a girl allegedly and all of that. So, I mean, it's nonsense. It's stupid. It's grasping for straws. And it's, once again, just a systematic way for these guys to get their headlines out. And I get it. Everybody wants hits. Everybody wants, them to go to their YouTube page and listen and like and subscribe and all that. So I understand what they're doing as far as being salacious journalists. But at the end of the day, once again, this is another symptom of them trying to tongue-in-cheek a small fact and make a mountain into a molehill. They've done this to a lot of other people. In fact, you don't have to go too far back in a couple of shows, probably like 3, 4, 5 months ago, where they were essentially saying somebody was a fucking rat. They didn't care about how that was going to be publicly perceived. They didn't care about the danger that could put people in. So once again, is their information good? Sure, they got factual stuff that they put out. I'm not knocking them for that. But then they put out a whole lot of other bullshit that doesn't make any sense, and they reach, and they try to connect dots that don't exist. So at the end of the day, you can believe whatever it is that you want. But I think that anybody that's going to see, Joey Merlino taking a picture with anybody, and they're going to try to connect a dot and make this into a conspiracy, and then they're going to double down on that by saying, oh, the FBI is putting pressure on this one and that one. Putting pressure on what? The kid's looking at 15 years in federal prison. There's CCTV footage of him doing this stuff. He's going to have to defend himself in court. He's looking at a ton of time, but that's what they do. They cherry pick the facts and they say, oh, he took a picture with Joey Merlino. Oh, he's looking at 15 years. He's young. There's no way a young kid's going to do 15 years. So that's what they do, and they take those two items and they try to make it into some fucking true Hollywood fucking story. And the reality is that it's not. They're just reaching, and they're going to love affair with Joey anyway. I've said that a million times. They can't do a single article. They can't do a single show without drooling all over themselves talking about Joey Merlino. So at the end of the day, I don't pay no attention to that stuff. It's just gossip. That's all it is it's gossip. All right. All that being said, I am working on a book, like I said. It's about halfway done. The title of the book is called The Mike and the Mob, and it's a story that I don't want to get into like the totality of what it is, but it's a bunch of stories that I know and I've heard, not from maybe, obviously names, dates, and places will change. And it's just kind of how I got started in this to begin with, and just some other things that I don't think anybody's ever really heard or known. So I got a lot of stuff I'm working on, and the book reads pretty well. I hate writing books. It's never been my thing. I'll be very honest with everybody. I hate it. It's tedious, it's obnoxious, and I don't like sitting there type. I don't mind typing. Don't get me wrong. I just don't like sitting there typing and getting in detail. And it just, because if you mention, and this is just for reference, Nicky Scarfo, for example, if you mention him, not only do you have to give the reader the full background of who the fuck Nicky Scarfo was, but if you're talking about a murder, now you got to connect all the people that were involved in it. You got to do a biography of sort of who they are, because if the average reader doesn't know who these guys are, you got to sort of give your reader the facts of who they are. So some of that has just been very, very tedious. It makes the book better because you're learning something at the same time. But it's going to be a very, very interesting book. I've got some photos I don't think anybody's ever seen that are going to come out. So it should be good. When it's going to come out, I don't know. I'm sort of in negotiations right now with the publishing company about that. They really, really like it, but I also have to sort of be careful with some of the legality of some of it because, obviously I don't want to jam anybody up, and that's not my intention, but there are certain things that I have documents for, FBI paperwork, and stuff like that. So that way, not only can I sort of tell the story, but you can see the documents for yourself, and that way people can't say, oh, well, he's making this up. Well, no, here's the documents on page 1, 2, and 3 that back up exactly what I'm saying. And it's going to be a street perspective on things. So if you're looking for a book that's going to be like A, B, C, D, and E, you'll get a little bit of that, but it's going to be from a different perspective. It's going to be almost anti-authority in a lot of ways, because that's just how I do things. Because every mob book comes from the perspective of the government, and the government was fighting, and they were doing this, and this affidavit and that. Well, this is going to be the reverse of that, and it's going to be from the defendant's point of view. And I think that's a unique way of doing things. But it will have the facts that the government alleges, but it will also have facts from the defensive side of things that prove that what they allege isn't the case. And obviously, I'm going to bring up Rudy Giuliani a little bit, especially when you consider some of the things that the government did, full well knowing this one wasn't the boss when they did the commission trial. And it just, like Tony Salerno, good example. He wasn't the boss when they took him there. The government knew he wasn't the boss, but they did it anyway. And they neglected to tell the jury. They neglected to tell anybody that they had information that they knew Tony Salerno wasn't running things. So that's the sort of stuff that I'm talking about. And there'll be some cases that we'll digest and stuff like that. So, like I said, it's probably going to be 200-300 pages. And there's going to be, I think, some other cool little tidbits. We're going to put some like gangster facts in there and stuff like that, and show you some famous mob places and stuff like that. So it's going to be sort of a bit of everything. But if you're looking for a book that's going to like dispel gossip, and it's going to like tell you stuff nobody's ever heard as far as a murder, I'm not going to get into all of that, because obviously I can't prove one way or another. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what happened in a certain instance, but I can give you the perspective of the streets, and that's probably going to inflame a lot of people. It's probably going to get me in some trouble, but I don't give a fuck. That's just what I do. All right, so all that being said, we are going to get to the Q&A portion of this. Per the usual, if I didn't get to your question, it's it's honest to God, at this point, I just have way too many and I can't keep up. All right, so I've been seeing Ciro DiPaggio all over social media about his new show called Mob King. Do you know anything about this or him? Is he real? He seems genuine. Wasn't sure if you've ever met him or talked to him. Seems like a lot of people attempt to hate on him so much, exactly like they try to do to you. What's the farthest it's gone as far as harassment? I do know Ciro DiPaggio. I have talked to him before. I've met him for dinner a couple of times with some other people. Listen, Ciro's doing what Ciro does. In a world where everything is categorized by who you know, what you know, this guy has essentially, no matter what anybody wants to say about him, he's genuine. He's chasing what he wants. And I think the reason why people hate on him is because they don't either understand what he's doing, or they don't believe him, or they think he's full of shit, or they think he's just trying to fool the world. But here's the point. When you grow up and let's say you want to be a cop your whole life, you either choose to be a cop, you take criminal science, and you go to college, you do the thing, and you try to be a cop. A lot of people, I think, hate on a guy like this because they feel like a failure themselves. They've never chased their dreams. They've never pursued their goals, their desires. And what ends up happening is they're bitter little fucks who sit at home and they type on a keyboard, oh, I don't like him, this, that, and the third. So they attack him. They attack him nonstop because he's doing what he says he wants to do. He's chasing his dream. He could have gone the studio route. He could have done the agent route. He could have done this route. He could have done that route. But what he has essentially done, whether you like him or not, is chased what he wanted, and he's accomplishing what he wanted. And I think people have an issue with that. People don't like to see people succeed in any stretch of the imagination, and that's the way the world is these days. It's the days of internet trolls. It's the day of everybody's right. They can trash you on social media and say whatever the fuck they want. But if you go back to when you were 10 years old and somebody did that, what happened to them? They got their teeth kicked in, they got their face pushed in, and they never did it again. And that's the society that we have today, is everybody's a fucking bully. Everybody can say whatever the fuck they want online, and they never have to feel worried because they don't think you're going to come to their house. They don't think you're going to do anything about it. And 99.999% of the time, nobody does anything about it. We don't give a fuck about you. If you have to spend your day looking at my shit, trying to figure out a way to ruin me, what the fuck has your life become? Your life is nothing. So if you're one of these assholes that spends his fucking days posting stupid shit, talking shit, real men don't talk shit, they do it. Real men don't lay threats online. You ain't gonna do shit. You're not gonna do shit. People who do shit, do shit. They don't tell you they're gonna do it, they just fucking do it. So I think in terms of that, I think that's why they hate on me. That's why they hate on other people. They make all these wild claims and assertions that don't make any sense. And the bottom of the line is, if you were intelligent, you had any fucking brain cells, you would realize one important thing. The more you talk shit about guys like Ciro, myself, and some of these other people, all you're doing is making them more popular. You may turn 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people against them, but you're not going to turn the other 10,000, the other 20,000, the other 30,000 against them. All you're going to do is drive people to their sites. They're going to keep going. Even if they hate the motherfucker, they're still going to go and they're still going to read. Because even when you hate somebody, you're still going to look it up. You're still going to listen. So at the end of the day, all you're doing for guys like him and me is just giving us more notoriety. Because I'm going to tell you the truth about life, and this is the God's honest truth, is that if you feed that bullshit, if you feed that desire that you have to just hate and hate and hate, the fuck you got to say for your life? Is your life that fucking boring and that pathetic and sad that that's what you're going to do all day long? Hate on this one, hate on that one. Ooh, here's a picture of this one in 1954. Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? So that kind of stuff really doesn't bother me. Now, as far as it's gone as harassment, look, I've had people harass my family. I've had people harass me. It's the same sick goons that do this shit all the time. They'll go and look at your friends list, and then they'll harass all your friends. They'll make up insane shit that's not even close to the reality of life. And they believe it. They think it's fact. They're so delusional about what they think they know that they just print it and they print it and they print it and they think it's truth. And meanwhile, you might get 10 people that buy that bullshit, But at the end of the day, all you're doing is helping me, you're helping Cyril, you're helping all these other people who you don't fucking like. So my suggestion to the people that do this is like, find something meaningful in your life to engage in. Because that negativity, I don't give a fuck if you like me. Because at the end of the day, I put my head on my pillow at night. I don't think about you. I don't give a fuck about you. I got my own life to worry about. You think I'm wiping tears? You think I'm laying on my couch going, oh, this one said this. I don't give a fuck, because I'm going to tell you two things that are very important. One, you don't say it to fucking me. You say it to everybody. You say it about me, but you never say it to me. Just like, and I'll give you a good example. Cyril and I once had a conversation on the phone. And he says, brother, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't want to put words in Cyril's mouth, but he says, I get 10, 20, 30, 40 fucking haters a day. He goes, I used to ignore it. He goes, now I confront them immediately and say, is there something you want to say to me? And they say nothing to him, because they're real big, bad, and tough on a keyboard. But the minute that he gets their number, or the minute that he gets their email and he looks at and he comes at them, they got nothing to say. And then guess what they do? They end up liking him, because he's a likable guy. So the difference between me and him is I just don't even respond. I don't even give a fuck. I used to in the early days of this nonsense. I used to respond to it. I don't now, because that's what they want. They want to feel so fucking special. Oh, I talk shit about the Mob Talk guy and he responded to me. He is such a piece of shit. But I don't talk shit to them back. I just say, what's your problem? Why is it that you feel this way? And 9 times out of 10 with most of these people, it's because they've been given information that isn't true. Nobody fucking researches nothing. They just go off what the next jerk off tells them. So at the end of the day, I don't give a shit about it. But what I've done now is I just block them. And some people go, oh, that's the coward's way out. No, it's not, because guess what? I'm silencing them because I don't want to hear it, because it doesn't do anything for me. And I feel bad for them. If your life has to revolve around being mean to people, and it has to revolve around harassing people to the point where your family is like, what the fuck is going on? Or friends who don't even know about you doing a radio show have to tell you that this one is alleging this about them, and they don't even know the people, that's what they do. They're suffocants, they're cowards, and they're jerk-offs. And they're going to continue to do it because society has determined that shit's acceptable. This shit's acceptable. It's just bullying. It's nonsense. It's what cowards do. And all of this nonsense about, oh, this one's going to come to you, that one's going to come to you, and this one says, I don't care. If I'm nobody and I'm persona non grata, what the fuck you going to beef with me for? If I'm nobody, I'm nothing, I don't know anything, I'm this, I'm that, well, why the fuck are you wasting 10 hours a day on this shit then? Why are you wasting 10 hours a day talking shit? And so that's my point. Listen, it's always going to happen that way. It happens to Trump. It happens to anybody in politics. It's just the way the world is these days. There's no accountability for being a coward, apparently. All right, so as far as Cyril goes, he's doing his thing. Like him, love him, hate him, he's at least doing his thing. He's out there doing his thing. And you can't knock a guy for that. You can knock a guy for any other reason, but you can't knock a guy for chasing success. Okay? And if you had any fucking success, you jerk-offs that are doing this kind of shit, then maybe you would be a little busier doing things that are positive in life than this fucking nonsense. All right. Given, by the way, that the FBI has been able to change how they surveil the mob, is there any way you can think of in which today's mobster can stay under the radar? Yeah, for instance, don't meet in public. You know you're going to be followed. You know you're going to be tailed. Don't meet in public. Or if you're going to meet in a place that's so fucking busy with people that it's hard to surveil. It's hard to listen in. I think also stay off the goddamn phones. Listen, here's a little secret. Burner phones, they can trace those. Burner phones, they can fucking get, you could if they get the number, they can still backlog everything. Doesn't matter if they have the fucking phone itself. There is an app on iPhone that you can turn off that will totally negate anything that the FBI can do. Because everywhere you go with an iPhone, it pings. So if I go to Trenton, it's going to log Trenton in my phone. If I go to Philadelphia, it's going to log it. So I know somebody, and I don't want to get into, sort of how I figured this out, but when I was getting a new phone, I was sitting with somebody who was fixing my phone for me at a store, and she says, by the way, she goes, if you turn this off, you can't be located. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't need to turn my shit off my phone. It's like not my problem. But she showed me, and all of a sudden, anywhere I'd ever been is wiped off. You can't get to it. Not that I'm doing anything anyway, but it's a privacy thing for me. So I think if you stay off the fucking phones and you just call, hey, how you doing? Hey, I got to meet you, XYZ, blah, you go, and then you go to the opposite of where you say you're going to go. Is if you stay off the phones and you stay off camera, you're going to be all right. You always got to worry about informants and people giving up information. That's just a fact of life. But stay off the goddamn phones. I can't tell you how many people I know that think they can bypass the fucking phone, and they can't. Stay off the fucking phones. That's the biggest thing. Don't leave a paper trail. You can take things from your childhood. Hansel and Gretel, leaving the fucking trail of breadcrumbs. Don't do it. It's not worth it. It's laziness when you use the phone and you say something stupid. Because you think, this one's never going to say this one's never going to say that, and they do. So don't put yourself behind the 8 ball to begin with. All right, I was watching Sammy the Bull Gravano's interview, and even though he testified against John Gotti, I believe a lot of what he was saying. And of course, he's going to rail against John Gotti a bit, but I thought of all the informants who have ever given interviews, he was perhaps the most honest. What were your thoughts? Well, the first time I watched it, I was sort of repulsed by the whole thing. That's just me. The second time I watched it, I started to ease a bit on the repulsion. The third time I watched it, I started seeing something a little different. And let me be clear. I particularly don't like what he did. I don't think I have to go into any details about that because I think everybody knows the pink elephant in the room there, why I don't like the guy. However, I think, and listen, I don't have a lie detector or a polygraph in front of me, but I think he told a lot of the truth. In many ways. I can't really get specific with you and tell you, oh yeah, he told the truth about this, he told the truth about that, because at the end of the day, there are three things between two people, all right? And this is the point. There's your version, there's my version, then there's the truth, okay? And that is the situation that I think we see with Sammy the Bull. He's talking to the interviewer, he has his perspective, he has his belief of how it went and what he's accepting when he hears Sammy speak. Then you have Sammy's version of things, then you have the truth. Okay, now where that line sort of lays, I really couldn't tell you. But what I will say is that if we break down just the John Gotti thing for a second, John got caught on wiretaps. I don't think there's any way around that. I think that's public knowledge. If John doesn't get caught on them wiretaps, does Sammy eventually do what he does? Maybe so, maybe not. And I'm not saying that someone getting caught talking justifies what Sammy did. But I think when you take the ego and the bravado into this, and you have a guy that's making a lot of fucking money for people, and he hears this guy bad-mouthing him all the time, there's two ways you handle that. You either kill the fucking guy, or you end up just taking a ton of time. Okay, or there's the third option and becoming a witness, and that's what Sammy did. Do I think that Sammy was lying through the whole interview? Absolutely not, because I'm going to tell you something about life. There is always some truth in something that comes out. There's never anything that's a total lie. There may be three facts to suggest it, and people will use that and say this is what makes it true, but the reality is there's always a little fact in a lie. There's always a little fact in nonsense and gossip. So that's the truth. So do I think he was totally lying the whole time? No, absolutely not. I never thought that. I think he really has nothing to lose. I don't think he's the type of guy who has sat back and denied doing shit. I think that he was honest in a lot of ways. Do I think he's a scumbag? Yeah, in many ways I do, but I wasn't in his position. I did not have my life to lose, so I can't honestly say, being in his position, that I would have looked at things differently. I don't know. I'm not in that situation. But what I can tell you is that I think he was pushed in that direction. It doesn't make it right. It does not make what he did right, but he was pushed in that direction. And a lot of people don't like it because it ruins the myth of other people. But let's be honest, when egos become sort of a power play against one another, and there's differing opinions of this and that and the third, there's going to be a large gap in between what two sides thinks. So was it entertaining? Yeah, I enjoyed listening to it. Yeah, Sammy seems like he's a funny guy. He cracks me up with some of the stuff that he says. I think he was brutally honest at some times, and I think at other times he sort of geared it more towards his narrative, and that's just the reality of it. I don't think we're ever going to know what the full truth of that was, and I don't think that's important. I think if you could take something from that and learn something from it, then so be it. But I don't think the whole thing was a lie fest. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right. Are you getting back to the biography part of your show? What can we expect moving forward? We are going to move to probably an app. Now, this is all going to be predicated on, I have a couple of meetings this week, I want to say, with some people, and we're going to try to figure out what we're going to do. I may be more moving to a humongous platform. I'm just not really sure yet. There's some negotiations and deals that we're talking about that have to sort of come together before I know. But yes, we are going to go back to the biography portions. I think that if we do what I sort of want to do, this is going to be a huge thing with guests, and I'll have people that can call in and stuff like that. So the show, if everything goes in the direction it is, it's going to change for the better, and it's going to be a lot bigger, and a lot cooler things are going to come out of it. But like I said, until I get to the portion where I know exactly what we're going to do, I'm sort of kind of in the background as far as that goes. All right. I've recently started watching Larry Lawton's channel on YouTube, and I really enjoy them. I think he was an associate of the Gambino crime family. Have you seen his videos about his time as a crook and his turnaround? If so, what are your thoughts on his videos? I have no idea. Okay. I don't know who the guy is. I honestly have never heard of the guy in my life. I have not had time to kind of do a lot of things the last couple of weeks, but I will check it out, and I will next week come back on and let you know what I think. But I've never heard of the guy. If I've never heard of him and nobody else has, who knows? All right, why do you think when the topic of the most powerful or greatest mobster comes up, Carlos Marcello is never mentioned? It's always Lucky Luciano, Al Capone, Carlo Gambino, or John Gotti. I think a lot of that is because Carlos Marcello was so low-key. Look, the American media jumps all over guys who are visible, guys who carry themselves a certain way. Carlos Marcello, wasn't that guy. He wasn't a guy that needed to be flashy. He wasn't a guy who wanted to be seen. You also have to understand, while Marcello was really powerful, really the bulk of his power was in the 1960s. And in comparison, look at Carlo Gambino for a second. He could shut down the whole entire eastern fucking seaboard if he wanted to. John Gotti only gets any attention because he thumbed his nose at the FBI. He openly did everything, which ultimately leads to the downfall of himself and the Gambino crime family for a long time. The Capone was really the first gangster the press ever really covered in a way nonstop. So it's really my opinion, that those who aren't seen and those who aren't heard really have more power than anybody else. If you have to be seen publicly, you have to be courted publicly, that's a problem. At least in the perspective of the last, 40 years or so. But also in the end, Carlos Marcello was not really consistently courting the press. He didn't want to have nothing to do with them. He didn't want to say anything to them. He kept silent. He kept quiet. He kept it moving. He wasn't seen out partying. And that's why he's not popular, because people like guys who are out, who are obvious, who are, I'm a gangster, I wear it 24/7. Who are you? Fuck you. Go ahead, come at me. That's why John Gotti's popular, because he thumbed his nose at the FBI, because he said, I'm a gangster, what the fuck are you going to do about it? Ultimately, and you got to look at Gotti's reign, was very short. Capone's reign was very short. The guys that stick their nose up at the fucking feds, the guys that don't give a shit, think that they're above everything, are the ones that have short reigns and end up dying in prison. That's just the reality of it. Otherwise, why does Vinny the Chin have a 20-year run? Why does Russell Buffalino have a 30-some-year run? Why does Ray Patriarca have a 25-year run without a problem? Because these guys stayed the fuck away. And that's the whole point. So, there you go. All right. What kind of role would Arnold Rothstein have played if he had still been alive when the commission was formed in 1931? I'm not really sure because of his Jewish background. I mean, he obviously, I think, would have been invaluable in many ways to organized crime, and I could see where he might have been sort of a tandem or a counterpart to Meyer Lansky, but he would have been probably important to the mob as far as being out in Vegas. If he had survived that long in Vegas, he had been alive long enough to be out in Vegas. I think he really would have been a great handicapper, and I think he would have been in tandem with Lansky to help sort of facilitate stuff, even in Cuba, for that matter. But really, nobody other than Lansky was really ever going to be in control of those rackets, and who knows what would have happened. But it's an interesting question, to say the least. I think had he lived, like I said, they would have used him in some capacity in Vegas and Cuba, but we're never going to know because of how he met his end. All right. Do you think it could be good when bosses change over frequently, whether it's jail, retirement, and by choice, or is it better for a family to have the same person in charge with one voice through a long time? I think it depends on the climate, to be honest with you. Look, if somebody's respected and liked and everybody's eaten, then it's business as usual. With the constant changeover, there's no really consistent basis. So if you're always changing bosses, then you're having a certain different kind of rules. You're having a certain different kind of structure as far as what they want to happen. So I think there's some argument to say that when you have one guy in charge for 30 years, it's all systems go. Guys on the streets want to be reassured. And they don't want consistent change. It's easier for them to function and do what they got to do if everything just kind of stays exactly how it should be. If we take guys who ran families for 30 plus years, they don't have problems like this. If you look close into those characters, rarely were there informants. Rarely. It's when a family consistently is making changes as to who controls what, and the rules and the parameters change. That's when you really sort of begin to have problems. The best bosses have been the ones who aren't greedy. Those who allow their men to eat, they allow them to make a living. Those are the groups that survive. Those are the groups that keep it moving. Those are the groups that don't have a lot of these decimations when the FBI comes in. Also, a boss has to be prepared to be violent. You cannot be a boss that's soft. You got to be able to be violent, because violence cures most problems. If they don't fear you, then they're going to do what they want. Niccolo Machiavelli always sort of said that give them just enough to eat and wanting just a little bit more. If you give them too much, they will overthrow you. You give them nothing, and then they will revolt. And I think that that's a principle that you can easily apply to the case of Angelo Bruno, for example. I mean, he wouldn't let his guys eat. He told them they couldn't move drugs, but then he was happy to allow the Cherry Hill Gambinos to come in and make profits off of drugs. When you stifle your own men and you allow another family to encroach, it's like spraying the trees with poison. Joe Profaci was the same sort of guy. How Joe Profaci ever made it out of this world without a bullet in his head just stuns me. Joe Bonanno sort of had a similar problem. He was never in New York, and his own men, sort of began to get frustrated by it. So I think at the end of the day is that when you have a standard that's set, like Carlo Gambino, for example, everybody knew for 30 plus years, 40 plus years, exactly what the deal was. When you start mixing and matching, that's when you sort of become to have problems. All right, do bosses and high-ranking capos of families still meet together like they did back in the days, like at social clubs or whatever? If not, how do they meet? For example, Paul Castellano used to have his shape-up guys and all the veterans and friends. As far as I know, from my perspective and what I do know, there's less emphasis today on meeting in public. Do they meet? Sure, but I don't think what you see in movies or on TV is very accurate. Guys don't want to get caught. Bosses very rarely will meet with multiple captains. They'll meet with one, and if you're smart, that's how you do things. You meet with one guy, the message goes out, and that's the end of it. Anybody underneath those capos shouldn't even know who the boss is, or they shouldn't even know really what's going on. They should probably be kept more in the dark than anything. But do they meet? Absolutely, and I'm sure that there are some social clubs that facilitate that, but it seems, at least in New York, they do not meet openly. The five families in New York aren't even really speaking to one another in terms of business-wise. Back in the old days, it was, the Genovese crime family would meet with the Columbos would meet with the Gambinos. They're not even doing that these days. There's very limited information. There's very limited conversations between them because everybody is so afraid of surveillance and everything else. Now, I'm sure if there's a beef or I'm sure if there's a business thing, I'm sure that they'll meet in some capacity, but I don't think that they meet one-on-one at all. And I'll give you an example. There's one of the 5 families that inducted 10 new guys, and I'm not saying this was recently, this is in the last couple of years, and they didn't even share that information with any of the other families, which was always sort of the way that the commission did things. When this group is inducting these guys, everybody needs to know who they are, and everybody has to take a vote. If one person says, no, he's bad, he's done. It's got to be unanimous, right? So the fact that this happened and that they didn't pass the list to anybody, they didn't say anything and to anybody, sort of tells you that times in the way that they do things has changed a little bit. Now, is that different for, say, mafia families in other cities? It may be. I'm not really sure. I don't have, obviously, I'm not going to any induction ceremony, so I couldn't tell you. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the less people that know what's going on, the better off everybody's going to be. All right. How much truth is it that the head of the DEA went to talk to John Gotti about killing or handing over Gus Faraci? And was it because of anything that from John that he was finally taken out, or was it his only family? Okay, so for those who don't know what this is about, this took place, I think, in like 1989, and basically what happened was a DEA agent was working undercover and was killed in Staten Island. The DEA did not know who did it, and they wanted the help of John Gotti. So the head of the DEA's New York office, Robert Stutman, ends up going to John Gotti's house, bangs on his door, and he explains that they believe that a Bonanno family associate, Gus Faraci, had killed a DEA agent by the name of Everett Hatcher. The DEA encouraged John Gotti to do the right thing. In return, if he did the right thing, law enforcement pressure would sort of back off the Gambino crime family. Now, this is not any surprise to me. This isn't shocking to me. This is how the government and the DEA and the CIA has worked for, 50, 60 years or whatever the case may be. And what ends up happening is a month after that meeting, Gus Faraci ends up getting whacked in Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst. So for the mob's part, they didn't allow anybody to kill cops. But what is kind of amusing about what I just said is that Sammy Gravano allegedly had a cop killed and paid Richard Kuklinski to do it, which is what Richard Kuklinski says, but you can't buy anything Kuklinski says either. But the thing is that there's a hypocrisy here, right? So there's a hypocrisy in the New York mob to begin with. Do as I say, not as I do. If we look at Gotti, everything he would tell guys not to do, he did himself. So I think, and I'm going to tell you the truth. I think if Gotti ever found out that one of his guys talked to a reporter, he'd kill him. But it was okay for him to do it. If John Gotti ever found out that one of his guys was courting the press, he'd kill him. But John Gotti could do it. So there's a lot of systematic hypocrisy in that. And I'm going to bring another reference in, and I'm not talking shit about John Gotti. I'm just telling you the facts. His brother Jeannie Gotti, probably remotely, and I don't know the specifics of the case, but Jeannie Gotti could have pled out to 15 years for trafficking, right? But because John Gotti Sr., nobody takes a plea in this crime family. Nobody takes a plea in this crime family. Because that's what he believed, he wouldn't allow Jeannie to take a plea. So instead of Jeannie just doing 15 and getting out, he spends pretty much the next 30 fucking years of his life in prison. But yet, if you go back to John Gotti's early days, he copped pleas. So yeah, there is a difference when you're the boss versus like an up-and-comer or whatever, but that's more hypocrisy. You cannot say, okay, it's good enough for me, but not for none of you. And I think that that's what a lot of people don't talk about. I think a lot of people that do, obviously get assailed in the media for saying it. And I think that there's truth. And it's not a way of bad-mouthing a guy. It's just being honest about the situation. You can't ask anybody to do anything for you that you're not willing to do for yourself. And that's just the crux of it. And so what ends up happening is Gus Faraci gets killed. And does that mean Gotti did it? I don't know. But I think what probably happened was there's too much heat. You killed a DEA agent. So ultimately, if they could find him and dispatch him, they would. Do I think Gotti did it or issued the fucking death warrant? No, I don't believe that to be the case. But it's a little circumspect. I mean, the fact the DEA went to talk to him, tells him to do the right thing, this guy gets killed. I mean, why are you working in tandem with the DEA? And if that story is accurate, which according to the DEA is, at least according to the agent, if that's accurate, well, what are you doing talking to the DEA? It should be like, open the door, who are you? Go fuck yourself, shut the door, and go about your business. But I understand Gus Faraci needed to go. He killed a DEA agent. You got to go. That's a big problem. And maybe Gotti felt like if he did this, they'd leave him alone a little bit, and they didn't. But at the same point, what are you doing talking to a DEA agent? Now, I don't have those facts in front of me, but I've seen multiple articles that were reported on this, so you can sort of investigate it for yourself. But what are you doing talking to a DEA agent if that's the truth? I don't even know how. That's the DEA's version of it, and I'm sure there's another version of it that says Gotti never talked to them in a million years, and that the guy never came to their house or whatever. But I'm just reporting what's been reported. All right. In your opinion, why do the DeCavalcantes have to share New Jersey? I understand connections and things, but it just seems like they can't go anywhere else, and I don't understand why that is basically the only state everybody can dip into. Well, that's not true. You can dip into Florida. You can dip into other states. Listen, today's mob, guys can function in other territories with permission of the boss. It's all about money. You think a boss is going to say, nah, your crew can't come up here because, it's my area. If they can make money off of this, they're not going to say no to that. So I think the reality of them not allowing isn't so much the case. It just has to facilitate a need, which that need is money. But obviously if they can move around and function, they can make a lot more money. You could build a bigger family. Everything's about turf, right? This is probably why you have a very anti-New York sentiment in Philadelphia and in New Jersey. They're active in other places, and that's the truth, but I think a lot of it's because it was New York's way of controlling things. They have 5 families in New York. They want to set the tone. They want to set sort of the parameters. They want to set the map, right? Look, New Jersey has representatives from all 5 families within New Jersey, and Philadelphia also has turf in New Jersey as well. And we have to remember, back in the old days, the DeCavalcantes, they had clout and they had money. How effective they are now, I honestly couldn't tell you. Ray Patriarca could have kept the Genoveses completely out of Massachusetts. All he would have had to say is, no, you can't operate here. But he chose to say, you know what, go ahead. We're going to put the line right here from Worcester down. You guys can have everything else. And he did that because he knew it was going to facilitate himself business-wise and money-wise. New York is sort of seen as the big bullies, up 95 to smaller families. If you look back at The Sopranos, the one thing that they got right was the disdain that New Jersey had for New York. I think it's the same sort of thing in Philadelphia as far as, I don't think they hate all of New York, but New York has always been, if you listen to Selwyn Rabb, he's like, this is the Ivy League of the mob in New York. Everybody else is sort of a subgroup. And that's not really the case. There's validity in smaller groups. There's power in smaller groups. And I think, you also have to look historically. You either challenge people or you just sit back and make money. So what are the Cavalcantes supposed to do? Take on all of New York? They're going to get killed, right? So the best thing for them to do is make fucking money. That's the bottom line. Anybody that tells you they joined the mafia because they want a car and a big house and pussy is lying to you. Those things come with money, and that's why they're involved. Money and power. You know what I mean? All right. If Caesar Bonaventure would have switched families after Carmine Galante's assassination, would he still have been murdered in 1984? And if he stayed on the Red faction, would the Red team have taken over the Bonanno crime family? Look, anybody who was involved in the Carmine Galante hit was going to be hit. So anybody that got involved in that was going to be killed anyway. So I don't think that either way, Caesar was going to get out of this unscathed. He was also one of the shooters. That's also worth noting. But had he left the family for another family because of his earning capability, then that might have saved his life. Absolutely. But here's the problem. Joey Massino didn't trust Caesar. And he worried that he was making too much money, he was too violent, and he could rival Massino's own ascension into the crime family because Caesar was the head of the Sicilian faction in that family, and it terrified Massino. So had the Red faction pushed as hard as they could, absolutely they could have taken over, but we're never going to know. All right. What standard practice or story have you heard of mob guys attempting to collect money, resources after the previous mobster was killed? In other words, what happens to a certain racket or hustle when the original owner of the racket is killed? It depends on the rank of the guy who was killed, believe it or not. If he was an associate, the captain automatically takes it, retains it, but the capo really technically owns it anyway because the associate is kicking up massively. But like I said, if it was a capo, obviously, if it was a capo who's killed, then obviously a higher ranking capo, if there is such a thing, would take that over, or they would just absorb that. And we've seen this type of stuff before, and there's a scene in Goodfellas that I think a lot of people don't realize that this is exactly what this person who asked the question is talking about. William Benvena, you would know him as Billy Bats in Goodfellas. So William Benvena, prior to going to prison, had several lucrative rackets, right? And they were handed basically off to Jimmy Burke at the time, and Jimmy Burke absorbed them, and what he ended up doing was making them more profitable. And the thing is if you could take somebody's racket and make them next level shit, then nobody's really going to bark at you when somebody wants stuff back. So Benvena ends up getting out of prison and he wants his rackets back. And that's not going to happen. Benvena then goes and complains to the Gambinos, who weren't really going to fuck up with the money that was coming in. And they're also not going to step on Jimmy Burke's toes. Because at this point, it's quiet. We're making a lot of money. Fuck Benvena. And so they just kind of left it be. When Jimmy Burke hears that Benvena does this shit, he kills him. That's it. Not only did you come out and disrespect me by saying I should just give them back to you because you're a made guy, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to kill you because you opened your fucking mouth. That whole shoe shine, go get your fucking shine box, never happened. That's made up. I see more people posting that shit online, and they obviously don't realize that it's never happened. That it was not a beef with Tommy DeSimone. It was a beef with Jimmy Burke. So Burke kills Benvena, obviously, and that's how that went down. Sort of an interesting other thing is when Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo, ends up going to prison. Now, Mikey Scars is one of the smarter guys that I've seen. He is what he is. He testified he's a rat. He's an informant. We know all of this. But Mikey DiLeonardo not only could make money, but he'd kill somebody too. He didn't hesitate. So he ends up going to prison. They kill his brother, and then they end up absorbing all of Mikey's rackets. So he's sitting in prison, going to fight all these charges, has no fucking desire to rat, has no desire to fucking snitch. And when he calls to get some of his money, it's all gone. They refused to give him any of his money. They absorbed his rackets because they were greedy. They took it. And what does he do as a result? He rats on everybody. That's exactly why he turned an informant. Because, you know, the old standard guard, the old standard rule is you go to prison, they take care of your family. He just wanted money to keep the stuff going. But in reality, they stole it from him. They didn't want to give him shit. He ends up ratting on everybody. I'm not saying it makes it right, but I think from the perspective of at least that's his reasoning for doing it. You know, I don't know given the situation. I mean, me personally, I'd just kill everybody if I could, you know, in all reality. But that's what they did to him. They stole all his rackets. And at that point, nobody wanted to have nothing to do with him. Oh, we took all your money, go fuck yourself. Well, he turned around and says, nah, you go fuck yourself. And he ends up ratting on everybody. And it's unfortunate, but that's just an example or an instance where we've seen the mob do that to somebody. All right, I've read in an old New York Times article that stated that Carlo Gambino was trying to combine all 5 families into one. Do you think there's any truth to that article? No, I don't think so. And he didn't need to, because at one point, anything Carlo Gambino has said was gospel. After Genovese was dispatched and ends up going to prison for the rest of his life, Gambino really becomes the head of everything for the most part. Gambino at the time had the most power, so he doesn't need to combine them. He doesn't need to be greedy. He's making enough money, and if he does that shit, believe me, he ends up in prison. Gambino was shrewd as fuck. He didn't need to heat from anybody. He was content in what he was doing. Perhaps the article was speaking from a boss of bosses type of perspective. But for the sake of this question, absolutely not. I don't think that's something that he would have entertained. All right, how many guys get to retire in peace or die of natural causes? There's a lot of people who did. Carlos Marcello, Ray Patriarca, Russell Buffalino, Carlo Gambino, Joe Lagambi, Sonny Francis. I mean, there's a lot of guys who have been able to die at home, retire, and go about their life, and who don't end up in prison the rest of their lives. And I think that speaks volumes about the character of those names I just mentioned. Being peaceful means you aren't in a cell. And I would say probably 2 out of 100 guys get out of the mob that way. There's not a high volume of people that can walk away from the life like that. So those that do, God bless them. All right. It sounds like the Anthony Comello trial will begin in April or May. About time, finally. Will you cover the trial? What happens when Comello's attorney asks Frank Callie's wife what her husband did for a living? I think this trial is going to be a real fucking zoo. I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, can we assume that the trial would be in Manhattan? The trial, I do believe, is going to be in Manhattan, and I don't think it's going to be necessarily open to a lot of people, and that's just because of the nature of what happened. Specifically, the kid wrote Trump on his hand or MAGA and all this stupid shit. But I think a lot of it's going to be specifically like media who have passes and family only. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think I could have the stomach to look at some punk-ass nutjob kid who did some dumb shit, who's going to end up at the end of the day getting a shiv put through his fucking skull within a year of being sentenced anyway. It's going to be an FBI agent event. I don't want to be around them. I don't want to be sitting there next to those scumbags. I don't want to be involved in it. But as far as asking Frank Callie's wife anything, they can't. Frank's not on trial, and you cannot ask a wife to testify against her husband or say anything disparaging against her husband, so you're never going to hear that happen. And I don't even think who Frank Callie allegedly was is going to have anything to do with this fucking trial. However, this fucking whack job Comello, who knows what the fuck he's going to say, the kid's guilty of it. He did it. He deserves to be killed for what he did, and that's the reality of it. I think I would have, I'm not saying murder's acceptable, but I think, he kills this guy in front of his family. Who does that? So, and then he does it because he can't stalk his fucking niece. That's what this is about, and I've said this before. This is not the first time Comello did this shit to a gangster's daughter. He did it somewhere. He did it in Staten Island to somebody else, and I know that because I know I've talked to some people who have direct knowledge of that situation. This is not the first time Comello did this shit. He apparently liked going after gangsters' relatives. But listen, it's easier to look at the end of the day. This kid Comello is going to be like Trump, MAGA, 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 and the kid's fucking old bots. He's nuts, and that's the end of it. He's going to get what's coming to him, and I wouldn't want to sit through that. I honestly don't think I could stomach sitting there looking at somebody's young children or their what do you call it, the widow. It's gross. The whole thing's gross. And I think the less information that comes out about that, the better. The kid's a pile of shit. All right, was Lucky Luciano and Al Capone close friends? You know what? I don't know. To be honest with you, I'm sure they knew each other, close friends. I don't think I would go that far. But yeah, they knew each other. All right, Vito Genovese versus Albert Anastasia in a table and ladder match live on ECW. Who would win? For my money, I'm going to go with Albert Anastasia because he had some big hands, and I think Vito Genovese wasn't very good at taking a punch because Lucky Luciano beat the shit out of him in an apartment. All right, did any New York family have gambling interests in Puerto Rico? To my knowledge, there was one representative in Puerto Rico, which I've talked about on a previous show, but as far as the mafia, no. What else? Oh, yeah, back to the Anastasia thing. Listen, Genovese was not a tough guy with his hands. He really wasn't. Like I said, there are reports that Luciano beat the shit out of him so badly in Cuba that Genovese had to wait 4 days before he could get out of the bed in that apartment. So I think Anastasia likely would have probably killed him within 2 minutes. But it depends. I say give them both a knife and a piano wire and let them go at it on live TV. All right, will you ever do a show on Bobby Mana? No, I will not. All right, with the recent Lucchese convictions of Matty Madonna and Stephen Crea, were the convictions done with pretty much hearsay? Yeah, I think they were. Listen, there's a lot of information contained in the trial that came from informants, two specifically who didn't even really know Crea or Madonna for that matter, one of which was a rat who ratted out John Riggi in New Jersey. somebody that they had wanted to kill. But the trial really was informant-based, but I didn't go to the trial, so I can't really speak to the specifics of that. Also they had wiretaps, and pretty much anytime there's wiretaps, that's sort of a shit sandwich to begin with. All right, the wrestlers Gino Hernandez, Buzz Sawyer, and Chris Adams allegedly were whacked by the Dallas Mafia for owing them drug money. Any truth to this? Also, can you do a show on Rene Graziano's father? I think his name was Tony Graziano. I heard about Gino Hernandez, but that was not mob-related. And I had heard that he owed cartels a lot of money, and it was really a fucked up thing. Dallas at the time was still active, but wasn't as big as they used to be. And I've heard from other sources who have said that it was actually Mexican cartels that Gino Hernandez had ripped off. And it was allegedly, at least from that perspective, they thought he was talking to the FBI or the DEA, which is why they killed him. Neither one, I think, was killed. Neither Gino Hernandez or Chris Adams were killed by the mob. The only wrestler, to my knowledge, that was whacked by the Mafia was Dino Bravo. All right, is it true that Francese, Jesus Christ, is it true that Franchise got traded for a carton of smokes to the Aryan Brotherhood? I don't know which Francis you were really talking about, Michael or Sonny. I would assume Michael, because Sonny doesn't have the rep of somebody who's being soft, whatever, not even at 102. And Sonny Francis has a birthday coming up on February 6th where he will be 103, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think he's 103. But no, I haven't heard that rumor before, but I'll definitely, look into it. Which of the 5 families operate from Park Slope, Brooklyn? The Colombos and the Gambinos. I think today the turf is a lot different than it was, say, back in the 60s, but it's always been a Colombo hotspot. All right. You said in the previous show that Al Capone wasn't the mafia and he ran a gang instead of a crime family, so why was Al Capone allowed a seat? Well, what I said was that Capone was not a traditional subscriber to the mob, meaning he didn't believe in making ceremonies, he didn't believe in any of that nonsense. His bottom line was just money. And he was more of a gangster than a mafioso. He would hire anybody, whereas the traditional Italian bosses would not interlope with other ethnicities. They would keep it all Italians, and et cetera, et cetera. There's been a long-standing argument that Capone, while having a seat on the commission, was not really somebody who could make his own decisions, and that other families kept him pretty much in line. You have to remember, Capone's reign was very short. In reality, he's a boss. Only 5 years, I think, somewhat similar to Gotti, who I think was boss of the Gambino crime family for 5 to 7 years as well. That's not in any way to disparage Al Capone. I just think his perspective was different, but he also ran rackets in Chicago, and there was also the Democratic machine in Chicago. There's also politics. So this is why, if Al Capone truly did have a seat, that's why he did. But just because somebody has a seat in the commission doesn't mean they're not mafia or they are mafia. It just means that they're recognizing that he is in control of Chicago for the most part. All right. Who do you think hit Rothstein? I think it was Maranzano. Actually, no, it was Dutch Schultz. Rothstein ended up fucking over some heavyweights in a rigged poker game. But Dutch Schultz also blamed Rothstein for the killing of his associate, Joey No. It was alleged that Jacklegs Diamond whacked No, and Jacklegs Diamond was under Rothstein, and so there you kind of go. So the order could have only come from Rothstein to do that. So you have to sort of understand that Lansky, Siegel, and Luciano would benefit most probably by Rothstein getting killed, because they can absorb his empire, and that's exactly what they did. So I don't think that this was just a one-off. I think this was something that was planned. I think Dutch Schultz was the guy that was put in control of doing it, and the people that benefited from that obviously were Bugsy Siegel, Meyer Lansky, and Lucky Luciano. All right. When I do research, Jeff, it always seems that the New Jersey Mafia has to take orders from the 5 families, or they operate on their own, and do they still have to pay taxes to the 5 families? Look, in the old days, they ran as one family, and they didn't need to pay a tribute. They didn't take orders back in the day whatsoever. They sort of did their own thing because they control Jersey, and they did their thing. These days, I'm sure New York kind of leaves the Jersey's guys to do whatever they want. But how much is actually left to the DeCavalcantes? I don't really know. I don't think that they pay a tax because all the 5 families, first of all, have representatives in New Jersey to begin with. And don't forget about my friends down in Philly. I mean, look, I always thought Jersey and Philly, if they ever combined together, it would make a very interesting crime family, and I think one that would be very powerful. But Philly doesn't need that nonsense. They're powerful on their own. They can get shit done on their own, and that's just the reality. And you can trust me on that one. All right. How does the mafia go about making their money nowadays? Since the old days, since a lot of the old ways are not possible any longer, what are they up to? Internet scams, stock market? What's their most profitable source of income nowadays? Look, they still have the same rackets they've always had. Drugs, sex, unions, hookers, loan sharking, gambling, construction, stock and junk bonds. That's never going to change. That's never gambling. It's nothing. Anything you can take from the 30s, they're still doing today, but now it's sort of grown to like HUD scams and other things like that. And like I always say, you can change the mask on the man, but the man is still the same. Leopard never changes its spots. So they're going to continue to do the same things they've always done. All right, does organized crime still have influence in the UAW, or does the UAW have its own corruption? I think both. I think not only is UAW corrupt on its own, I think the mob still has its hands, especially in Detroit, into the union. I think that's I think that's very obvious. All right, any update on Philip Narducci? Is he out yet? No, Phil will be out in 2 or 3 weeks. I think. No, it's less than that. Let's see, 2019. I think 2.5 weeks. He's due out the 20th of this month. I'm not really exactly sure if that's the exact day or whether he'll get out a couple of days before that, but he is due out on the 20th of this month. All right. Why do you suppose Santos Trafficante turned down Sonny Black's request to do business with him? Were the Bananos on the outs pre-Pistone, or did Trafficante not trust Napolitano personally? I think it was likely more or less a combination of Trafficante sort of had his own thing going on and likely had more to do with the outs, with the Bananos being on the outs. They had a lot of problems. I think Trafficante probably just realized that this is not going to be the most lucrative thing in the world for me to do, but, if I can get a kickback or two, then that's fine. But I'm sure he gladly would have taken a cut. I don't think he ever would have said no to a dime. But even though the Trafficantes were run by Florida, it was always considered open for business as long as Trafficante got his cut. So I think it's a bit of both. All right. How do wise guys go about changing a family name? Is it a power thing or a respect thing? Well, look at Vito Genovese easily did it, and a lot of the ways he was able to attain that is because he pushed Luciano out, and his ego fed into that. Carlo Gambino did the same thing with Joe Colombo, same thing there too. Joe Colombo only got his own family because he ended up going along and allowing Gambino and Genovese to fucking rat out Anastasia. And he also, really, Colombo ran back and told them about murder conspiracies from Joe Bonanno. And that's the other reason why Colombo even ends up where he was. I don't think his trajectory would have been any different had he not run to them and said, Joe Bonanno's going to try to kill all of you. And as a result, he gets his own crime family, which he names it after himself. But I think a lot of it's ego. And if they have a lot of power, who's going to oppose that? Joey Massino actually tried to change the name of the Bonanno crime family to the Messino crime family, and John Gotti stood by him and even tried to help him do that, but the commission wasn't going to do it, and thank God for that, because we know how Joey Massino ended up. All right, we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to finish up the rest of your questions.
We get illy, tough like South Philly. Got the cold steel, it's about to get chilly. Major figures like Gilly, I'm an outlaw kid Billy. How the fuck am I funny? You'll get slapped silly. Learn from the OGs, respect what you're shown. Real stand-up guys like Sonny Mazzone and Joey Merlino. We bring beef like Gino, steak out at your house with a hidden name Nino. I know the gutter real well. My dudes coming through with that gunpowder smell. If you can't tell, I enjoy hell. G's moving silent, you'll never hear me yell. Stand up guys rise, no disguise, we in the place. Thick ass thieves, nobody is safe. Reality rap, don't touch the waters. Cold of the streets, you gotta follow orders. Stand up guys rise, no disguise.
And we're back on Mob Talk Radio. Going to round out the rest of your questions here. The next question on the list is right here. All right. How did Henry Hill get in the crew he was with? All those guys were monster earners, and pretty much Henry Hill was a nobody. Look, Henry Hill was willing to do what most people wouldn't, and Henry Hill did earn money. Don't get it twisted. Henry Hill may have been a lot of things, but he had earning capacity, and that's, I think that's a lot of the reasons why they allowed him in was because of his roots. He knew Paul Vario, he knew them guys since he was a kid, and he did bring in money. Believe me, if this guy couldn't bring in money and he was just a junkie and a drunk, they would have killed him. You really think that Henry Hill would have survived all that? So I think the fact that Hill brought in money, the fact that they could trust him, they accepted it. Now, I'd agree in comparison to others, he wasn't on the same earning capacity as like others in that crime family or other people, but Jimmy Burke liked him too. And I think that Jimmy Burke carried a lot of weight. I think the fact that Paul Vario liked him carried a lot of weight. And I think that that's the reason why they allowed him to function. Now, in the end, they had enough of his shit, and they were going to kill him in the end. But unfortunately, he becomes what he becomes. All right. Is the Canadian mob more powerful than the American mafia, and which makes the most money? Look, I think first of all, the New York mob makes more money. Okay, there's 5 families. You gotta do the math on the numbers here, right? Just the numbers wise in New York, they are bigger than Canada is. But if you want to look at Ndrangheta, there's a big difference. Ndrangheta is worldwide. They're just not in Canada. They're all over Italy. They're in Germany, France, Saudi Arabia. They're fucking everywhere. That membership rivals in the thousands. So if you want to compare and contrast New York to Ndrangheta as a whole, big difference. But since we're talking about Canada versus the United States, I think the United States mafia the American mafia makes more money at this point. But look, Ndrangheta has killed politicians. They've killed cops. So have Sicilians in Italy, if you want to take it that far. New York gangsters really never had that kind of power, but also they wouldn't dare do that sort of thing because it brings too much heat. However, if we're going to argue anything, we got to argue that they could have had they could have had involvement in the John F. Kennedy hit and the Bobby Kennedy hit. So it's hard to make that argument, but I think more power. I think New York has more power over Canada. Absolutely, I think they make more money. But if we're going to talk worldwide, then it becomes something completely different. All right. Do you have any info on Russell Bufalino's brother, the attorney? He actually was not the brother, and he actually was not related to Bufalino. Bufalino allowed him to use the name to help him sort of get a little notoriety. So there you go with that. What's your opinion on how Big Paul's house was bugged? FBI acting as a cable guy, or Joe O'Brien and his partner drugging the dogs and breaking in? You know what? Listen, I don't know how they did it. I could just go off of what the FBI has always said. I think they drugged the dogs. They went in, they turned off the alarm. They went in, they installed bugs, and that was it. I think sitting here arguing over who did it and who said what, how they did it, well, what does it matter? They still were able to bug the guy's house. That's the bottom. It just is what it is. All right, next question that we have. Who, in your opinion, was the most powerful, influential, violent, and feared in the mob? Carlo Gambino or Lucky Luciano? Excuse me. Well, to call Carlo violent is sort of a misnomer. Yes, he had killed people. Yes, he would order the deaths of other guys. But was he physically violent nonstop? No. But like I said, he could press a button and it would get done. I think Luciano would absolutely kill himself if he could not kill himself, but kill someone else if he had to. I just don't see Carlo sort of in that way. Ultimately, the more feared of the two was probably Lucky Luciano, but then again, Gambino wielded more power than Lucky Luciano could ever have. The more influential can be argued both ways. Gambino controlled the Eastern Seaboard. He was insanely fucking powerful, put his own mark on the mafia, but Lucky Luciano really is the godfather of organized crime for a reason. But of the two, I think Luciano was the most influential, but I think the most powerful was Carlo Gambino. All right, in the Godfather movies, did any of the characters that were portrayed were any of the characters portrayed after real-life mobsters? Absolutely. Mario Puzo based many of the guys on actual people. Luca Brasi, who was played by Lenny Montana, was actually a Colombo hitman. A lot of people don't know that. In the scene where Frank Pantangeli ends up getting strangled, was essentially sort of paying homage to what happened to Albert Gallo, who was Joey Gallo's brother. So one may make the argument that Frank Pantangeli was somewhat based on Joey Gallo in a sense, but a very loose sense. But there was a lot of tongue-in-cheek moments as far as the characters go in those films. All right, here's a hockey question. Finally, I've been waiting for this all year. Do the Bruins have what it takes to win the Stanley Cup this year? What about Toronto? Toronto, I don't think so. Sadly, I don't think that Toronto has the total components to make a long run, but hell, anybody can catch fire. As far as Boston goes, they have a lot of depth. But as I always say, the team that leads the division all season usually is ousted in the first or second round. Look at Tampa Bay Lightning, for example, the last couple of seasons. They've been really great all year, been the front runners in the NHL, and boom, they're out in the first, second, third round. And there's something about not facing adversity during a season that just allows these teams to coast. If you don't have injuries and you don't have any adversity, you sort of go into the playoffs just sort of running it the same way you always do. Whereas, take the Penguins, for example. They've had more man games lost to injuries than any other team in the last 3 years. They're missing Crosby and Malkin half the season, not half the season, but 3/4 of the season or whatever the case may be. And they still were able to put together a lot of wins and stay in the hunt. So I think that if you want to keep your mojo going into the playoffs, you got to face some sort of adversity, and Boston just doesn't seem to be facing a whole lot of adversity, and they just keep coasting along without a whole lot of problems. And believe it or not, the hockey gods are going to step in and correct that, I'm sure. But the same thing can be said for the Washington Capitals. When you play well all season, I have found over the years that doesn't transition into the playoffs, because the day the playoffs start, just like any sport, be it baseball, be it 0-0. And hockey playoffs are one of these things where any team can win. You could get in by the fucking cunt hairs of a fucking mouse and win the whole fucking thing. The playoffs are something totally different in the NHL, and it's totally different than the NFL to the extent of it's just a different animal. So do I think Boston? No. I don't think they're going to win the Cup this year. I don't think Toronto will either. I just don't. I think Toronto specifically, because they need to add some players. They need to make some decisions on certain guys. But I just think if you don't face adversity, it's a hindrance, not a help. And some people may argue differently with that, but it is what it is. All right. What was the reason John Stanfa wanted VC dead, or was it his brother Billy or something else? Who said John Stanfa had... Okay. Here's the thing. I'm not exactly sure exactly what you mean by this question, but the one thing I could say is who said that John Stanfa is the one that made the call on VC? It might not have been Stanfa, and I don't know which VC you're talking about. Are you talking about John VC, or are you talking about Billy VC? You have to look at this objectively. Stanfa made John VC. Why? Well, he killed, and he would do whatever Stanfa wanted, and they had a war with the Merlino side of things. But the thing is, VC couldn't earn to save his life. He's a junkie his whole life. Everybody knows that. That's publicly noted. So why would he decide to kill John VC? Why would he just decide, you know what, we're going to kill John VC? This guy did all of Stanfa's dirty work for him, so why out of nowhere would he just kill him? Billy VC gets whacked because it was an attempt to silence John VC from testifying. And who said Stanfa was behind that? Look, Philadelphia is always a paradox. Maybe it was a hit designed to look like Stanfa did it. Maybe somebody else was behind that. We're never going to know. But guys in Philadelphia are very shrewd like that. Not everything is as it seems or as it looks. And that is one of the more interesting things about the Philadelphia Mafia when you look at them as a whole, is that they're very shrewd in how they do things. And it's very Machiavellian to kind of watch it play out. And I think that, like I've said a million times, the closest thing you're ever going to get to the heyday of the mob is looking at what Philadelphia does and how they do things. They're very shrewd, they're very capable, they're very dangerous, and they're highly fucking intelligent. And I sort of marvel at them because when you look at the mob for what it is and its entirety, especially in 1960s, 50s, they operated under the radar. They would kill guys. They would do what they have to do. And if you look at that whole entire war that took place between Stanfa and the Merlino side of things, because that's what the government has alleged happened, you have to marvel at young upstarts who are basically trashed by Stanfa as young upstarts, nothings or whatever, but they took it to his ass, didn't they? Where's he? He's sitting in prison. Who won that war? So I don't think we can necessarily say Stanfa did it, didn't do it. I just think there's more to it than that. And honestly, I don't fucking know. It's just the sort of mob historian I am, or the way I see things is not everything as it appears. And you know, killing John Vesey's brother didn't really affect anything because he still testified, right? All right. Do you think the Russian mafia is stronger or on the same level in the States? Just in the States that look... Wow. All right, do you think the Russian mafia is stronger on the same level in the United States or just in the states that Cosa Nostra has, and does Cosa Nostra still trump them? Cosa Nostra still trumps them. They, like the Albanians, they want to be Italian. They want to be organized, but they're not nearly as organized as the Italians are. Everybody wants to be the Italians because they organize so well. And it's not to say that the Russians are not tough, they're not deadly. That's not to say the Albanians aren't tough, that they're not deadly. But at the end of the day, the Italian-American mafia is much stronger, but Russians still control little areas of Brooklyn and stuff like that. But they're not as organized. If they were as organized as the Italians, it would be a little different. All right, the mafia cops, which I saw with my own eyes on numerous occasions, there were always people missing in Bensonhurst. Okay, let me rephrase this. The mafia cops, which this person who asked me this question has seen them with his own eyes back in the day, it always seems that when people were missing, the mafia cops are around. Forgive me, but I'll never forget what they did, scumbags. Yeah, absolutely. And William Melito makes the biggest mistake of his life by going on Sally Jesse Raphael and including pictures in his book. He doesn't do that. Him and Stephen Caracappa don't get caught. Louis Ippolito doesn't get caught. They don't both die in prison, and that's the reality of that. All right, what are your thoughts on Ori Spado? So here's the thing. I had never heard of Ori Spado until recently, and a lot of people haven't. I don't know the guy personally. I know him and Michael Franchese are having a lot of beefs on YouTube, calling each other rats and fighting and stuff like that. I had not heard of the guy until he started posting on every single mob group page with his book. But listen, let's be honest. He was not a gangster. He never had his own crew, and that's self-admitted on his own behalf. That he was not in the mafia. He didn't have his own crew, and then he changes it that he has his own crew to 4 or 5 guys. While he was absolutely arrested for things under RICO predicates, and he did know Sonny Francis, he was not a gangster. That is definitely some interviews. I think they're laughable. And I really couldn't hold a straight face with some of the stuff that he was saying. Look, I'm not against a guy who's trying to make a couple of dollars from a book, but the majority of what he says can be refuted by a lot of other things. He claims to have known all these people, specifically Russell Buffalino, but I did reach out to somebody in Russell Buffalino's family, and they've never heard of the guy in their lives. So does that mean he's lying? I don't know. I don't know enough about the guy. I think that he has told some truth as to far as who he is, but I think it's a very grandiose version of who he was. And he's choosing to fight with Michael Franchese of all people, which is sort of very telling to me. So listen, I'm not knocking the guy. He's got to sell a book. Let him sell his book. But I wouldn't believe a fraction of anything that he says. I'm not trying to badmouth him. I just think that when an interviewer says, look, the statute of limitations is over, you can say what you want, and they kind of stutter step through the whole thing, that's very telling to me. So no, I don't believe really much of what the guy says. I've never heard of him, and I've heard of everybody. I've never heard of this guy in my life, and so I think that he has taken liberties of his own. Are there any Irish crews out there that currently have power and rackets in the United States that you know of? Yeah, the Westies are still very active. It's not like it was back in the 80s, but they still operate out of Hell's Kitchen. The Irish Mafia is still active in Boston. So, yeah, there's a fringe group in Ohio as well. So, yeah, they have their rackets. They're still there, but they're not as big as they used to be. All right, last question. Who is running Howard Beach? Now that John Gotti is gone, I hear that crime is rampant in Howard Beach. Look, the Gambinos are still there, but from what everybody has told me, at least from the people I talk to, and I'm in Howard Beach a couple of times a week because I know some people out there, and it is overrun with crime and problems. The Gambinos are still pretty much entrenched in Howard Beach, but look, the days of the neighborhood being protected by John Gotti are over. They've been over for a long time. The old days are gone, but the Gambinos still have territory there. They always will. Howard Beach has always been a Gambino enclave. It always will be. But the days of John Gotti are over with, and it's as simple as that, to be honest with you. And so that's pretty much it that we have for the show today. We are going to come back next week with an all-new show. I'm going to post the new Q&A stuff over on Facebook probably on Friday, and then we'll come back on Tuesday with a brand new show, or Wednesday. And in the meantime, if you need to reach me, go over to Mob Talk Radio over on Facebook. That's how you can submit questions. And that's pretty much it. I wanted to thank everybody for being patient for the last month. But we will be back next week with an all-new show. And in the meantime, be good to each other.